She held my wedding quilt like it was clutter, folded it with careless hands, and typed out a listing like it meant nothing. The caption read, "Never used, doesn't match my aesthetic, asterisk." It was stitched by my grandmother's dying hands. I didn't scream, I watched. I let the silence settle. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It comes in curated captions and quiet theft. It wears pearls, serves chamomile tea, and tells you this is for your own good. I never thought I'd find our vows for sale, or the silver from my mother's side wrapped in butcher paper offered to strangers for $20. But I did. And when I did, something in me closed like a vault. Before we go deeper into how everything unraveled, make sure to subscribe for more real revenge stories. Leave a comment if you've ever trusted someone, only to find out they were slowly rewriting your life without asking. I grew up inside stories. My parents died when I was 12, and my grandparents raised me in a small, book-filled house where everything had a past. My grandmother taught me how to preserve family linens with lavender sachets. My grandfather would whisper names of ancestors while tracing the carvings on old furniture. I didn't inherit wealth, but I inherited weight history, meaning memory. I learned that love doesn't need to be loud to be lasting. When I met Elias, I felt the same quiet depth in him. He wasn't dramatic or dazzling. He was still thoughtful. He listened without needing to fill silence. We were both drawn to the idea of something permanent. We didn't rush. We built something slow and deliberate, and by the time he proposed, it felt inevitable. His mother, Celeste, was always gracious. That's the word people used. She had a way of making her presence known without ever seeming intrusive. Always offering, never asking. She insisted on handling the wedding details as a gesture of love. I was reluctant, but Elias assured me this was her way of connecting. He said she didn't do well with emotions, that she preferred action over affection. I told myself I could be flexible, that love required compromise, that maybe, just maybe, she would grow to see me not as a guest, but as part of the lineage she so carefully guarded. When she reprinted the wedding invitations without consulting me, I let it go. When she removed the handmade place cards I spent weeks creating and replaced them with embossed ones she preferred, I swallowed it. She said it was about elegance, about presentation, but each change rewrote something I had touched. And each time I stayed silent, I felt myself becoming smaller in my own story. I brought a quilt to the ceremony, my grandmother's final gift, cream thread on pale blue cotton, every stitch a memory. Celeste never commented on it, never touched it. During the reception, it vanished from the bridal suite. Elias said it probably got packed with the gifts. I wanted to believe him. After the wedding, I felt unsettled. Not because I wasn't happy, I was, but there were pieces missing. Cards I'd written, notes from my late mother, trinkets I'd kept in a small wooden box, all quietly absent. When I asked about them, Elias shrugged, said his mother probably thought they were clutter. I didn't know it yet, but she was already curating my history, deciding what stayed and what didn't. The lie didn't come with a declaration. It arrived folded in tissue paper, carefully packed away, like something she'd already decided I wouldn't need. It started with a teacup, bone china, faint rose pattern, a hairline crack that my mother used to trace with her thumb when she was nervous. I hadn't seen it in years. I thought it had been lost in the move after the wedding, but there it was, on Facebook Marketplace, listed by someone named C. Albright, photographed on the marble countertop I knew too well. At first, I stared at the screen, convinced I was wrong. But the crack was there, the same fragile line I used to watch as a child. The caption read, "Vintage teacup, sentimental, light crack, $10. I clicked on the profile. public listings, 17 in total, and my heart fell into a quiet, heavy silence. A pair of silver candle holders from our wedding. The monogrammed wine glasses my father's best friend had sent. The hand-bound vow books Elias and I had written in, my handwriting exposed under the caption, handmade wedding notebooks. Gently used? Asterisk? Each item was like a piece of my life being pulled out of a drawer and priced. The gifts were specific, nothing mass-produced, nothing meaningless. These were the things I had packed myself, protected. Items that held weight because of what they represented, and now they sat in a digital yard sale, sold to strangers for pocket change. I confronted Elias that night, showed him the listings, the photos, the profile. He looked exhausted before I even finished, said maybe his mother was just helping us declutter. Said maybe I was overreacting, said these things didn't mean the same to everyone. I asked him if he thought our vows were clutter. He didn't answer. Celeste, of course, played the role flawlessly, claimed she thought she was being helpful, said she didn't realize those things mattered so much to me, smiled with just the right amount of remorse. "You're so sentimental, dear," she said. "You should have spoken up." There it was, the erasure framed as care, the theft disguised as tidying up, and the gaslight flickered to life. If it hurt, it must be because I was too fragile. Not because she had crossed a line. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just stood in my kitchen, holding the image of my mother's teacup in my mind, like it was a wound no one else could see. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The betrayal wasn't just in the things she sold, it was in the knowledge that she believed she had the right to decide what stayed in my life. She had rewritten the record of my marriage, quietly, carefully, and with no apology. And I knew then I would not forgive it. Rage was never going to work, not with Celeste. She had built her life on the illusion of civility. Outbursts only made you look unstable. And if you dared challenge her in public, she'd blink calmly and ask if you were feeling overwhelmed. So I went still. I stopped asking questions. I stopped searching aloud. Instead, I started tracking quietly, precisely. I created a burner Facebook account under a fake name. I used an old photograph and set the profile to private. I began messaging her listings, pretending to be a collector. She responded quickly, always polite, always firm on pricing. She offered porch pickups only, no deliveries. Everything was cash. I bought back the vow books first, paid $40 for them. She didn't recognize me. I wore a hoodie and sunglasses, kept my voice low, thanked her without looking up. Her porch light flickered as I walked away. I still remember the sound of the door closing behind me. Over the next month, I bought back 6 more items. The silver, a pressed flower frame from our wedding table. The poem my best friend had written for us, framed in walnut. Each purchase was a retrieval. Not just of the object, but of control. I began documenting everything. Screenshots, receipts, listings, her captions, the sale dates. I built a digital folder and named it Legacy. I met with Miriam next, my grandfather's old friend and estate lawyer who had known my family before I was born. I asked her to help me look into something I had long suspected, that a portion of my family's heirlooms had been legally willed to me before the wedding, items I had brought into the marriage and that Celeste had claimed as gifts. Miriam pulled records, read old clauses, and there it was. A formal will tucked into dusty files, stating that the silverware set and the quilt had been passed to me upon my grandmother's death. Not to Elias, not to the household, to me. Celeste had no right to sell them, and she had known. The family had discussed it once, years ago. She had chosen to ignore it. At night, I lay in bed beside Elias and said nothing. He was still defending her, still believing she meant well. I no longer tried to explain the ache. I knew he couldn't feel what I felt, that loss of memory, of lineage, of self, but I could, and I knew how to make it visible. I wasn't angry anymore, I was focused. I understood that she had tried to erase me by erasing what tethered me to my past. She thought silence was submission. But I had learned to weaponize silence. It began with an invitation, embossed cream cardstock scripted lettering sent to nearly 50 people. Celeste was hosting what she called a legacy dinner, an annual gathering she curated to celebrate family roots, community prestige, and charitable presence. She'd hosted them before, but this time it was bigger, more curated, more theatrical. She called it an homage to what we preserve and pass on. The irony didn't escape me. She asked me to help, said she wanted a younger touch this year. I smiled and accepted. I offered to help design the slideshow presentation, sort the decor, even curate a photo wall. She was flattered. She mistook my grace for surrender. Behind the scenes, I was orchestrating something else. I had reclaimed 12 items by then, tracked 6 more. Miriam had quietly secured a formal legal notice verifying the inheritance clause and time-stamped Celeste's violation. I created a visual presentation under the guise of family history, a digital archive I told Celeste would play behind her opening speech. She never asked to see the final version. I kept everything sterile, elegant, each item photographed with white background, cataloged like a museum exhibit. I added screenshots of the listings, receipts from my purchases under alias accounts, and dated conversations with her, all stitched into the visuals. No blood, no commentary, just evidence. I also invited one person Celeste hadn't expected, Miriam. Officially, she was a distant family friend. Unofficially, she was my anchor. Someone who remembered who I was before Celeste started rearranging it. The night before the dinner, I walked into the venue alone. I made sure the AV setup was working, double-checked every frame, every transition. I spoke to the coordinator and made a single request, that the slideshow start precisely after Celeste's toast, not before, not during, after. The next day, I wore the earrings my mother left me, the ones I hadn't worn since the wedding. They were small, unremarkable to most, but they steadied me. Celeste arrived early, floating in silver chiffon, kissing cheeks, complimenting guests with her usual practiced grace. Elias trailed behind her, distracted, tired. He still didn't know what I had planned. I didn't need him to. As guests trickled in, I moved quietly through the space, checked the light, confirmed the playlist, polished the frame of the quilt I had retrieved just 3 days earlier. I placed it beside the podium, draped with a thin white cloth waiting to be unveiled. The evening unfolded smoothly. Wine poured, laughter echoed. Celeste welcomed everyone with a toast about lineage, about grace, about preserving what matters. She had no idea what came next. And I never raised my voice. I didn't need to. I had made sure the truth would speak for itself. The applause was soft, polite. Celeste stood at the center of the room, her hands folded, eyes gleaming beneath chandelier light. She had just finished her speech, something about legacy not being what we own, but what we honor. Her voice had trembled in all the right places. There was a pause, the kind of silence reserved for reverence. Then the screen lit up behind her. At first, it seemed like a continuation of her slideshow, a sepia-toned photograph of her and Elias from his childhood. Then another old family gatherings, black and white portraits, curated memories. She turned, smiling proudly, assuming it was the montage she had approved. But then the first listing appeared. An image of a silver candle holder gleaming in daylight, captioned, "Excellent condition, heirloom piece, no longer needed. Asterisk price, $25. She hesitated, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. The audience murmured. Then the next one, our vow books, handwritten, romantic, gently used, $40 asterisk. And then the teacup, my mother's teacup, centered in the frame like an artifact, that crack so familiar it still felt warm in my memory. One by one, the items slid across the screen. No commentary, just listing after listing, each with her name as the seller, each dated, tracked, archived. I stepped forward calmly. I didn't raise my voice. I stood beside her, eyes on the guests. Many of them were family. Others were from the community board she chaired. A few had donated to the Heritage Society she often boasted about. "Everything you're seeing," I said, "was taken from our home and sold, without my knowledge, without my consent." Someone gasped. A few looked at Celeste. Her smile had vanished. She turned to Elias, but he didn't meet her gaze. "These weren't just items," I continued. "They were memory, history, my mother's last gifts, my grandmother's legacy, my vows, my name." The quilt was unveiled, framed, perfectly restored, displayed beside me. Miriam stood quietly in the back, holding the notarized letter. She stepped forward and handed it to Celeste. "This confirms that the silver, the quilt, and several other pieces were legally willed to me," I said. "Your daughter-in-law, not your house, not your estate. Me." Celeste's hands trembled, but she held the paper like it might burn her. Her lips parted, but no words came. "I didn't press charges," I said. "This isn't about theft. This is about erasure, about the belief that you could decide what mattered and to whom." Elias finally looked up. His face was pale, drawn, quiet. I saw something shift in him, then something essential breaking. He took a step back from her, not toward me, just away from her. The room stayed silent. No one applauded, no one spoke, and that, somehow, was louder than anything I could have said. Celeste stepped down from the podium, slowly, deliberately. She passed the quilt without looking at it. Her shoes echoed on the floor like a retreat. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. The room had already chosen what story they believed. And this time, it wasn't hers. The morning after the dinner, the house was quieter than it had ever been. No more passive-aggressive reminders from Celeste about folding linens a certain way, no sudden rearranging of the living room. No unannounced visits, just stillness, as if the very structure had let out a breath it had been holding for years. Elias barely spoke that day. He sat at the edge of our bed, turning the silver candle holder over in his hands. I didn't interrupt his silence. There's a kind of grieving that has no words. It wasn't just his mother he was reckoning with. It was the version of her he had spent his life protecting. He had to decide if he'd mourn the illusion or see the truth clearly, without flinching. A week later, he packed a bag and left to stay with a friend. Not in anger, not in shame, just in recognition that something had cracked between us two. He said he needed time. I told him I'd already given it. Celeste disappeared from public life, resigned from 3 boards, canceled 2 speaking engagements. Rumors circulated, of course, but no one said anything directly to me. They didn't have to. The silence that followed her was enough. She never reached out, not to apologize, not to explain. Control was her only language, and I had taken that away. I kept the recovered heirlooms boxed for a while. I wasn't ready to display them, not yet. They needed to rest. They'd been held by too many careless hands. They needed space to feel like mine again. Miriam called a few days later. She didn't say much, just that she was proud of how I'd handled it. That legacy is only sacred when it's protected by people who understand its weight. I thanked her. She understood things most people didn't. Memory lives in objects, how the smallest thing can hold a life. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded, like I had finally reclaimed a version of myself that had been slowly disassembled over time. Not just by Celeste, but by every moment I had chosen politeness over truth. Every time I'd swallowed discomfort for the sake of harmony. Every time I doubted my own instincts. The marriage wasn't broken, but it wasn't the same. I didn't know yet what would happen between Elias and me, but I knew one thing. I would never again let someone else define what deserved to be remembered. And whatever came next, I'd face it with both feet planted exactly where I belonged. I waited 6 weeks before I opened the final box. Inside, wrapped in layers of linen and quiet, was the quilt. My grandmother's stitches, still precise, still warm in their own way. I ran my hand across the seams like they were sentences in a language I hadn't spoken in too long. I didn't cry, I just sat with it, let it speak. Later that week, I took the heirlooms I'd recovered, each one chosen not for value, but for meaning, and created a display in the study. A shadow box of small, deliberate history, the teacup, a pressed flower, the wine glass with the faint scratch along its stem, the vow book tied shut with ribbon. At the center, I placed the quilt, folded neatly, with one corner showing the initials stitched into the border. Asterisk, LRF asterisk. I called a local artisan to seal the box in glass, told him it wasn't for showing off, it was for keeping safe. Above it, I hung a single photo, black and white, me, Elias, and my grandparents standing in front of the church on the day I graduated. No one else. Just the people who raised me, and the one I had chosen. When the room was finished, I stood back and looked at it not as a gallery, but as a boundary, a quiet, firm line in the sand. A week later, I found out I was pregnant. I didn't tell Elias right away. I needed time. Not because I was unsure of him, but because I wanted to feel the joy before anyone else could touch it. I sat in that study for hours, my hand resting over my belly, and I whispered stories into the stillness. Stories of quilts and silver, of what is stolen and what survives, of how sometimes the softest things hold the sharpest truths. When I finally wrote the letter that would one day accompany the display, I kept it simple. To my daughter, asterisk, everything in this box was taken from me once. I got it back without screaming. I got it back without violence. I got it back because I knew who I was, even when someone else tried to rewrite it. Asterisk. You are not clutter. You are legacy. Asterisk. Protect it. Asterisk. I sealed the envelope, tucked it behind the vow book, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something let go inside me. Not anger, not grief. Just the weight of being erased, finally lifting.